Welcome to Online Seller UK podcast. My name is Prabhat, founder at Online Seller UK, and today we've got Martin Heubel with me, and we'll be talking about Amazon vendor strategies, and also we'll talk about vendor profitability and sort of very important one, negotiation management. So, Martin, thank you for coming and welcome to our podcast.
Hey, Prabhat, thanks for having me again.
Excellent. So, Martin, I think it's good for you to introduce yourself, your company, and then we can take it from there.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Martin Heubel. I'm an e-commerce strategy consultant and helping first-party vendors that are dealing on a day in and day out basis with Amazon to kind of make sense of it and to also kind of enhance their profit margins in their daily work as well as in their annual vendor negotiations with the online marketplace and online retailer. My firm under which I do that is called Consulters. So it's the kind of combination between consulting and commerce. And yeah, I'm pretty excited to be on the show again with you today because I think there has been, not often a better time to kind of discuss and dive into the challenges of a lot of vendors that they are facing with Amazon, simply because I think we're in the perfect storm right now where the pandemic is over and Amazon has readjusted its business and also their vendor managers to kind of double down on the profitability areas of their business and to kind of ensure that they optimize not only their top line performance going forward, but even more so their operating margin and operating income in its retail division.
Excellent. I think margin is always a very important aspect for any business here. So let's talk a bit more on that. So before we talk about margins, every year we sort of get the negotiations for our negotiation requests for vendors. So and it's always challenging, I guess. And you've been dealing with vendors for many years. So let's talk about what sort of challenges vendors face in terms of negotiation with Amazon.
Sure. I mean, I think what we are seeing over the last few months, but also in general over the last few years, is that Amazon has shifted its focus areas. And if you go all the way back to pre-pandemic in 2019, Amazon was already in that spot where they pretty much optimized for profitability and where for the first time, a lot of brands in Europe, but also in North America, saw Amazon conducting large-scale delisting or crack-ping activities in order to optimize their bottom line. Now, what happened since then is that, of course, due to the pandemic influx of top-line sales growth, Amazon had to rapidly shift its focus away from this profitability mindset towards an availability focus, where Amazon wanted to enable a lot of brands to either come on board through vendor or seller central and onboard their products and make them available, because they, of course, saw that they had at a large scale the warehouse capacity because they've built that up over the years. And they were actually able to tap into the efficiencies that would pursue and bring simply because they could use all of their existing fulfillment nodes at maximum capacity. And of course, once a lot of suppliers saw supply chain strains and pressure on their supply chains throughout the pandemic due to the sudden spike in online demand, Amazon kind of accommodated for that and was focusing and shifting a lot towards an availability focus that incented brands to sell on Amazon, because Amazon moved and introduced a low ASP initiative where brands all of a sudden could offer products below a €5, pound, or US dollar threshold, sometimes even as low as less than $1. But of course, now that the pandemic has worn off and the pandemic impact has worn off, what Amazon is almost forced to do is now to kind of clean up its bottom line. The recent quarterly and annual earnings report saw actually a decline in their overall operating income. And this is something that Amazon needs to address. So of course, vendor managers are now shifting back towards a very aggressive profit focus where they say, look, we do not really almost care about top line growth in 2023. We need to kind of right-size our business across departments and also in our retail division with you, dear vendor, in that case. And I think this caught a lot of brands off guard, because when they have conducted their forward-looking sales targets for 2023 until 2028, of course, a lot of analysts and customer insight teams have made decisions on how much growth to lean against the e-commerce channel and to Amazon in particular, based on the growth trajectory that they have seen under the availability and sales focus of Amazon in the past few years. And this clashes right now with a lot of the sales ambitions that these brands have, because on the one hand, they are faced with significant growth targets that their teams have to achieve. But on the other end, they have now an online retailer sitting on the other side of the table who wants to see a significant step up in profitability. And of course, on Amazon, typically growth comes at a cost. And this is now where a lot of brands are struggling a little bit to readjust to this new reality and to also ensure that they're diversified enough to not only lean all of their eggs in one basket in terms of top line sales against their one retailer, Amazon.
Yeah, so one of the interesting thing which we have seen recently is Amazon is a vendor is quite actively seeking new accounts. So they are reaching out to Seller Central sellers to sell to them. It's both we're seeing this both in the UK and Germany. I believe this is part of the strategy which you are talking about.
I think you're seeing two trends here, right? Because quite recently we had the news that Amazon is actually trying to part ways with a lot of the distributors who are currently first-party vendors to Amazon, but who are also constituting the kind of man in the middle who wants to take an extra cut in order to ensure that they can have a viable business model. Yeah. So you see two trends. I think on the one hand, Amazon wants to kind of clean up the first-party vendor central side of its business by saying we want to work with really the A brands of each category that drive customers into our virtual store. And we want to have a direct relationship with them. Because if you don't have that, then of course, if you're considering how Amazon looks at it, you also don't own the stock and you also don't own the availability piece, because if you have a direct relationship with a manufacturing brand, you can address forecasting, you can address out of stock levels. But if you have somebody in the middle who's kind of an intermediary between Amazon and the manufacturing brand in this trade relationship, that interferes quite significantly. And on the other end, you of course also have Amazon now looking actively for these A brands inside its own marketplace, because they are not only looking at the Nikes or Dysons of the world, which are quite publicly saying they don't want to work with Amazon and sell their products on Amazon themselves, but they're also looking at the opportunities that are already actively selling on their marketplace, which are a lot of large 3P sellers that have quite a successful business, and where it often also makes sense from a supply chain point of view to consider a move towards the vendor central side, because in some areas, so in some countries and marketplaces, Amazon can still offer large-scale onboarding of a lot of products through dedicated direct import or European inbound consolidated services that they can offer on the logistics side, which often come either at a different price point on Seller Central or are not available at all.
Yeah. So I've got another question with which is about seller going to vendor, but I'll come to that in a second, because we've seen that trend happening because people are looking at the margin. But let's go back to the vendor negotiation. So what sort of questions or what sort of things that we expect vendors to ask in terms of negotiation with vendor this year?
So generally speaking, what we see Amazon doing is two main things, right? They want to improve their payment terms in order to ensure that they optimize for cash flow. And they also want to ensure that they kind of right-size the investments of vendors compared to the top-line sales performance that they have seen over the past few years. So there's naturally a focus on bottom line instead of top-line performance in the current negotiations, where a lot of brands are being caught off guard because they're saying, look, we follow a more for more approach. So hence, we will only give you more investment if you commit to us and with us to a certain growth ambition. And over the past years, it has worked quite well because also vendor managers sitting on the other side of the negotiation table didn't have really a doubt that the growth performance will cease to exist anytime soon. Now we're in that position where Amazon internally has to kind of prioritize profitability and also to slow down sales almost of brands that are not fitting the narrative of their profitability thresholds that they have defined for their categories. Which brings in a couple of complications that brands that have not done their homework during the years will struggle with to kind of really unlock during the negotiations. And when you look at the key building blocks that are typically helping a brand to delve away from a pure profitability focus in the annual negotiations is that those brands that are doing it successfully have looked at differentiating their portfolio, rationalizing it, but also ensuring that they're launching, for example, dedicated and channel-specific products that are not necessarily exclusive to Amazon, but cater a certain margin need that they anticipate Amazon requires based on their last 12 months or last 24 months margin performance on the Amazon marketplace as well. These brands have it significantly easier to negotiate because they typically see tailwinds not only in the ASP, but also in the net PPM, so Amazon's margin performance. And that is, of course, then also easing the tensions that otherwise an Amazon buyer would put on a brand in order to kind of ensure that they come to a good outcome of the trade discussion. But on the flip side, I think it's also a good warning signal to all brands that are always kind of deferring and delaying the discussion around addressing really the root cause of low profitability in the Amazon channel. And it's almost a wake-up call that they need to do their homework throughout the year and not only consider any kind of one-off payments or cash injections during the negotiations just to send the vendor manager their way. So I think there's a little bit of a shift happening right now because a lot of brands are also seeing that the revenue share with Amazon compared to their total business is growing and has grown. And in order to sustainably address all of these margin challenges that now a lot of suppliers are facing themselves, they'll need to become more creative around how they define the portfolio with Amazon, whether they really want to list their entire range or whether they are optimizing the portfolio for the Amazon customer in particular, and maybe give a certain part of the portfolio to distributors who are either vendors or sellers going forward to Amazon themselves in order to shoulder products that are either not a good fit for the vendor model or are just not meeting the profitability standards that both sides have decided to target as an objective over the next few years.
Okay, no, excellent there. So I think it's good information in terms of profitability and protecting this margin. But we've also recently been contacted by a large electronics vendor in Germany and France. They have been recommended to look into Amazon FBA model and slide away from vendor side. And they've been advised that your margin would be better if you slide into FBA model rather than a vendor. So, and I'm sure you must have heard these sort of things time and time again. So, so what do you suggest in those situations, or what should be your advice for those vendors who wants to go to FBA model?
Sure. I mean, you see it more and more, right? That a lot of brands are considering a move either completely towards 3P or a hybrid model, consider a hybrid model. I think it's a good business standard to kind of review at a regular basis where your profit margins are unfolding in a more effective way, right? Whether this is directly through a direct 1P relationship or whether you prefer a hybrid or 3P model. But it should be data-driven. And what I see happening a lot in our industry is that, of course, a lot of agencies are referring to this FBA and 3P model in the hopes of course, also accessing additional revenue through additional advertising money. But oftentimes, it's not really backed up with a thorough business case calculation that not only accounts for the actual costs of selling a product through each channel, so either through Vendor Central or Seller Central. But of course, we also need to always consider the hidden costs that a move or a switch on such a scale can bring to an organization. And typically, the larger the organization, the larger the hidden costs become. Because think about the following. Your teams typically, especially if your business comes out of a more traditional bricks and mortar world, will be very used to handle a retailer that has a wholesale model. So Amazon First Party Vendor Central is kind of the go-to solution because you get the wholesale model, and B, you also can mirror the kind of trade discussions that you would have with any other retailer. And that really means that if you're moving to 3P or an FBA approach, all of a sudden you have to handle a lot of these things yourself. You need to manage your pricing yourself. You need to manage your inventory yourself, and you have to finance these software or tools that are out there in order to do so and in order to automate it. Or else you're actually investing into more headcounts to kind of manually interfere with all of that. And of course, there are very good solutions out there. So I'm not saying that this isn't the case, but they come at a cost that is often overlooked because you also will have to invest in staff, either training or in hiring staff that is accustomed to the 3P and FBA model in order to kind of cater to both if you decide to follow a hybrid approach. And that is typically what a lot of brands are stumbling upon and have a rude awakening once they have decided to actually go down that path, which is not considered in the first place.
Yeah, so there is no straightforward answer by the look of it. You have to check all the things. So thanks, Martin, for advising on that. I think we're coming to the end of this podcast. So before we end, is there anything you would want to add to the conversation we have just had today?
Well, thanks for having me, Prabhat. I always appreciate it. If anyone has any specific questions around the current negotiation cycle, then make sure to follow me on LinkedIn. And yeah, I'm looking forward to hopefully be here next time.